Hello, and welcome back to the official Lost podcast. It's been a while since we've posted, so we have lots of goodies for everyone. As they say, secrets are revealed. Well, not really, but they're definitely talked about. First up, we have a special interview with executive producer Brian Burke. And later, we bring you the wonder twins of writing, executive producers Damon Lindelof and Carlton Cuse, who look as much like each other as Danny DeVito and Arnold Schwarzenegger. I won't say which is which, you figure it out. They'll be taking more fan questions, queries, and strange looks as they give us hint after scintillating hint for the upcoming episode, The Whole Truth, which airs Wednesday, March 22nd from 9 to 10 p.m. Eastern. These days, Brian Burke plays an integral role in ushering Lost through its final post-production phase, including overseeing those oft-talked-about Easter eggs, like the plane that was seen or not seen in the episode Fire Plus Water. However, Burke, or Berkey, as he's known after a few drinks, has been with the show since its inception. In fact, he's old school, like Adam Sandler and Billy Madison old school. As we learned, Burke has been rolling with the Bad Robot crowd since the early days of Alias.
Well, I started working on with Bad Robot and JJ on the show Alias in the first season. I'd actually known JJ for a while, but purely socially, and we've been friends for years, but we never worked together until the first season of Alias, when he was about halfway through the season, was spending a inordinate amount of time in the editing room and not enough time in the writer's room. And the process of doing a show requires, breaking new ideas and working with all the writers, and then at the end of the day, he would have to start putting together the shows as they would come in after the director's cuts were done, and he just didn't have enough time to do that. Usually, it's the directing producer who does that, who was Ken Olin, and still is Ken Olin. The problem is that Ken was off directing, a good percentage of the episodes, which left him unable to be in the editing room as well. So JJ asked if I would come in and help out in the editing room. So that's how I started on Alias, and I was there for since the middle of the first season. And then when Lost came about, it was just us.
Even though the first DVD details those first few hours of Lost's creation, hearing it told from Burke, well, that's just cool. Specifically when it came time to cast the character Kate.
The Kate character was an interesting situation because, we've said many times the character of Jack died at the end of the first act, or the end of the second act. And it was going to become Kate's journey by the end of the pilot. And she was going to take control. So it was really kind of a really crucial role. And we had met some incredible actresses had come in over the course of casting this. And we'd seen well over 100 actresses who came in, which means our casting directors had seen hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. And we got 2 tapes from Canada that had come in. And one of them was this great actress who works a lot, who was very good. And another tape, and she was really great on the tape. And then the other tape was this girl that none of us had ever heard of, who was Evangeline Lilly. And I just remember watching the tape because it was at the end of the day, and we just had a casting session all day of, dozens of people coming in. And we all went into this little room to watch this tape that April had. And when we saw Evangeline, we all thought she was really good. It was JJ who said at the time, after we'd watched the scene, he said, no, she's really smart. It was something he saw in her performance that you could really see her process and how she was working. So we had decided to fly both girls down from Canada and to meet with them in person. And we met with the first girl, who was great, who was just very professional and really good and really got the part. And then Evangeline came into the room. And if that was the only person, I would have thought that, we found our Kate. And then Evangeline walked in, and JJ kept saying, you're going to know when she comes in. And, I'd felt that with all of our other characters, and I kept thinking, well, we've seen so many girls, and we had some favorites that we liked, and, I kept, thinking he was a little crazy. In any case, so in walks Evangeline, and she was great. Like, really, really great. And I remember we're sitting in the room, and Damon was sitting next to me. It was just Damon and I, and JJ was directing her, and Alyssa Weisberg, who was also casting with April and also did an incredible job, was running the camera, was filming it. And she came in and she did her performance, and she was spectacular. And I just remember Damon sliding me a piece of paper that said something to the effect of like "home run" or "this is our girl." We were literally like, in junior high school and sliding each other paper about this girl and how incredible she was. And JJ had asked her to put her hair back because her hair was like kind of covering her face a little bit, and she has very long hair. And the second she put back her hair, that was like the moment when we knew, oh my God, that's her, that's Kate. And he gave her some adjustments, and she went back and did the scene perfectly, and like no one else. It was like shocking, and it was like, oh yeah, he's right. You'll know it when you see her, and there she was.
Because the show was being written simultaneous to its casting, hence the reason they thought Jack might not make it during Evangeline's casting session, not all the characters were written, as was the case with the character's son.
All the characters on the show, in its formation, kind of came out of Damon and JJ's head, and then what happens is we kind of find the actors that work for it, and then, more or less they start adapting. However, in the case of Yunjin, for example, like we knew there was going to be, it was an international flight, and that there would be characters who didn't speak English. And Yunjin came in first. She was the first person we cast. And she came in to read for Kate. That was the only part we had written at the time. And it was our first person. She came in. We immediately fell in love with her and said, okay, she's on the show. And the couple will be Korean who doesn't speak English. And, in certain cases, obviously, and the same thing with Charlie. Like, we had an idea of what the character would be, but we conformed it to the actor.
Casting stories aside, we decided to ask Brian the big questions. What's with all the Easter eggs? Though we framed it a little better than that.
I think our first Easter egg came from JJ and I, which was in the pilot episode, or part 2 of the pilot episode, when we put when we decided to have the French woman mention the Black Rock in the radio transmission, even though Shannon never translates it. She's talking about, I'm going to try and make it to the Black Rock, which we're very excited about. That in the very first episode, we mentioned the location that they end up going to in the very last episode. So, it's fun for us, obviously, to put things in. Often, we think they're just for us, and there's plenty of them that people haven't found. A lot of them, they never were really intended to become, to cross over to the mainstream. We always thought that people would pick up on them and they would talk about it on the internet. And when we were doing this season, when we had Walt talking backwards, we thought maybe, Damon, it was actually Damon's idea for it to be backwards, and we had thought maybe a couple thousand people would pick up on it, would take the time to play it backwards. And the day after it aired, we got numerous calls from people all across the country who had heard it played forwards on radio stations, and that wasn't obviously what we were thinking. And all of a sudden, everybody was picking up on our Easter eggs. So, which in some cases made it more difficult in the editing room because, often to make things work, you'll flop shots, which means like turn them around just to make them work. But sometimes shirts will be backwards or something like that, something you would never notice. But because of a show where, people are looking for Easter eggs, it tends to be bizarre because people will pick up on things that aren't Easter eggs. So we have to be extra careful not to put things on because, we don't put anything in that we don't know answers to or why they're there.
That's it for now. Next week, we continue our interview with actor Jorge Garcia as he recounts some of his toughest scenes to shoot this season. Now, though, we turn it over to executive producers Damon Lindelof and Carlton Cuse.
All right, welcome to another podcast. I'm Carlton Cuse.
And I'm Damon Lindelof. Jeez, is this a rerun podcast? Is this a new one? I can't track anymore whether or not.
There are no rerun podcasts.
This is a fresh episode.
Fortunately, we can crank out podcasts at a much quicker rate than we can crank out episodes of the show.
Oddly enough, though, we have made just as many podcasts as we have episodes, so I would actually challenge that notion.
Well, no one actually has asked us to do a podcast for a rerun of the show, but if we were asked, we could do that.
Could we do a rerun podcast for an original episode of the show? That would be cool.
That's a little mind blowing.
How would
I'm
that
gonna have
even
to think
work?
about that. Exactly.
All right.
And on that subject, we will be getting to these fabulous questions a little bit later, but one of the questions that keeps getting asked over and over is the issue of why are there so many reruns? And
Usually that question is accompanied with a threat.
there are many.
It's sort of like, I will kill you guys.
Vindictives.
Why are there so many reruns? Or I'm going to stop watching the show is a popular sort of...
Let's stick with the stop
Threat.
watching the throw thread, okay? Show
Or the
thread.
throw.
No, not yes.
Carlton actually has a throw over his legs right
No.
now because he's chilly. It's sort of an FDR thing that he likes to do.
Exactly. And smoke cigarettes in a long holder.
That has nothing to do with the throw, though. I'm just,
Um,
we're all entitled to our quirks.
Anyway, all right. Let's try to address this rerun issue. Okay. Basically the thing is that we only can. It takes us about 3 weeks to a month to make an episode of the show, and basically we work pretty much around season. We work pretty much year round on the show, but by the time we actually write the episodes, produce the episodes, do all the post-production of the episodes, we physically cannot produce more than 22 to 24 episodes a season. This year we're doing 24, and we are killing ourselves to actually accomplish making 24 hours of the show. The problem is there are 52 weeks in the year, and the network business works in its own mysterious ways, but they have certain periods when they really need to have original episodes. One is at the beginning of the season when they're launching new shows, and because Lost is successful, they want the ratings of the show to launch a show behind it. And then there are 3 sweeps periods, which really matter to the networks because that's when ratings are measured on a much more intensive level, and they use those ratings to set advertising rates. And since this is a business about making money, they want to get the most ratings that they can during sweeps.
As opposed to a business about losing money, which is it's another way to go, but not
As
as,
opposed
not
to-
as effective.
As opposed to art for art's sake.
Right, exactly.
So basically, the show has to be on at the beginning of the season. It has to be on during November for November sweeps. It has to be on in February for February sweeps, and it has to be on in May for May sweeps. And so as a result, the 22 episodes get scattered across those 4 periods, and that whole, I think the whole TV schedule is like 36 weeks or something like that. And
it gets very frustrating, and I think, more importantly, the season catches up with you.
Yeah.
That is to say, right now, at the time of us doing this podcast, we are basically writing the final 4 hours of the show, the last 3 episodes, but production is right up against us. So, we're
going to be shooting the last 3 hours simultaneously with 3 different crews in order to get those episodes on the air by May sweeps,
Right.
which is
we're delivering the episodes wet, which is, the best we can do, which is why you probably see shows like 24, which premiere and they can do a consecutive run because they start in January as opposed to September when Lost starts. But 24 is they're writing the show at the same rate that we are. So essentially, all of us are cramming in the end stages.
And so when you say delivering the show wet, because that's kind of a really cool technical thing, what are you referring to, Damon?
Well, it's like if you took a test and you handed it in, it's like the ink on your test is still drying. So we actually shoot these things on film, and you have to process them in a dark room. And you just, I think that the idea of like, wow, the film is still wet. They just got it from the developer. Because sometimes, and we're not joking,
No.
you're probably completely bored right now, but we have an awesome associate producer in the post-production crew named Tamara Isaac, and it's her job to run over the final of Lost over to where it's going to be aired out of on a Wednesday, and sometimes she gets that that cassette or that DVD or whatever it is that she has. It's big.
It's like Holly Hunter in broadcast news.
It is
right?
like an hour before it airs on the East Coast.
And they're running. They're running. Yeah,
And she's running down the street like Greg Brady in that amusement park with the Yogi Bear poster.
That's a little obscure.
It is obscure, but at the same time, who's listening to this podcast? I mean, come on. You guys know what I'm talking about.
All right. On that,
Like this is mainstream, what we're doing right now?
let's rehash maternity leave, shall we?
Yeah, it feels like so long ago that it was on.
Yes.
But,
We discovered the medical hatch.
right. What's the name of that hatch, Carlton? You don't know.
It's called the medical hatch.
Yeah, right, because there's the Swan
Yes.
and the Arrow, but we've never heard. We don't
Right.
know what its name is, so
Right.
maybe we'll find that out at some point.
Well, We like
I
to
was
refer
trying-
to it as the medical hat.
I was trying to trap you. And
You're
trick
trying
you
to get
into
me to
give me a spoiler.
No, I'm not doing that.
All right.
One of the things that we did do in this episode, which was cool, is we actually did flashbacks, but we didn't flash back to the character's past off the island. We flashed back to a character's past on the island, and that was new.
That was new, and it was very cool. I think that the subject of Claire's missing time has been something that people were very interested in, and it gave us sort of an opportunity to use the flashback device in order to sort of advance island mythology, which is something that we love to do when we can. And obviously a lot of our flashbacks have sort of centered around the airport, and so it's not the first time that we've sort of done flashbacks. Starting the Lost story really doesn't start with the crash. It starts with sort of everybody gathering at the Sydney airport, and by the end of the season 1 we'd actually told that entire story. So it wasn't completely outside of the box, but at the same time just seeing pure island stuff was very cool. And obviously Emily was awesome, but it was also great to see William Maypother again on the show.
It is. I mean, what's really fun is to actually have a character back who is dead but isn't really dead. I mean, we're not doing the false resurrection of these guys. We're actually just going back to past chapters in their lives.
Yeah, one of the things we like to pride ourselves on the show, for whatever it's worth, because there's a lot of things not to be proud of, like Carlton's throw, is that when someone dies on Lost, they're dead. And that's really it. Like, we're not trying to be sneaky and they're going to come back as a zombie, or hopefully that you will learn over time as an audience that when someone buys the farm,
Year 7, you're going to regret that zombie comment.
I am really going to regret that. Year 7 is actually, the subtitle is Lost Zombies, and it's just everybody who we've killed off over the years coming back and trying to eat.
It'll be
brains.
cool. It'll be like Stephen King's The Cell.
I like that. That was a good book,
Yeah.
by the way. I enjoyed it very much.
We love Stephen King.
So what? Oh, okay. I'd actually. There's a couple things to rehash, but just one other thing before we get to questions, because we burn so much time. The fascinating,
World of reruns.
Now you guys will all go out into the world and say, "You don't be so hard on those guys over at Lost. There's a very good reason they're in reruns. See, there's 3 periods called sweeps. But in any case,
it's going to be a narcolepsy wave.
yeah, exactly. Wake up if you're still sleeping through the rerun talk. But we had to go on record and explain it.
And now must we hammer it into the ground?
We mustn't. Don't ash that long cigarette on my shoulder anymore. Talk about Echo cutting off his goatee.
You just want this throw, and I'm going to give it to you for your birthday.
Will you please?
Yes.
I have a birthday coming up, and so do you.
That's true.
Talk about Echo cutting off his goatee. What was the symbolism of that?
Well,
It's not really quite a question, but it's part of the rehash, and I think it's an interesting story point in that episode.
it was just something that we thought was incredibly cool. I mean, and he had 2 little knots on his beard there, and he had killed 2 people earlier in the other 48 days, and perhaps there would be a connection with the fact that he cut off those 2 knots, and that was related to the 2 people he killed and was doing penance over by not speaking for 40 days.
What's really interesting on the show is things like that happen, and we leave it up. We have an idea, exactly like Carlton said, of what it might symbolize, but that doesn't mean that Adewale has the same ideas. He's playing the scene. And that doesn't mean that Michael Emerson has the same ideas. He's responding to that action. And most importantly and most excitingly, you as fans can sort of take that gesture for what it is. And instead of us telling you, here's why he's doing it, actually make the character say, I am cutting off these 2 knots because I killed 2 men. We actually sort of leave it in a fairly vague space. And it's that interactivity, the ability for you guys and gals, all 3 of you who are listening to the podcast, to enjoy the the sort of to activate your own imaginations as you watch the show, because chances are you'll think of something 10 times better than we'd ever come up with.
All right, so let's do a little preview on The Whole Truth. That's coming up. In general, what can we expect from this episode, Damon? Whose story is it? And what hints, if any, do you want to tease the audience with?
Well, Carlton, it felt so natural the way you delivered that, as if you weren't.
As if I wasn't reading it?
Almost as if you weren't reading it, which you weren't.
I wasn't.
Yeah.
So in general,
It's
what can we expect from this episode?
Well, this is a great episode. Elizabeth Sarnoff, and Christina Kim wrote this episode, and
Did she say "Don't call me Liz" on the podcast?
I don't know. Did she?
No,
I mean,
just
her
Liz.
name on the she's billed as Elizabeth, although we all know
we
her
call
as
her
Liz.
Lizzie. No,
If you see her on the street, I would not call her Liz.
I would call her Miss Sarnoff.
Yeah, if you're nasty.
Okay.
It's
Anyway.
a Janet Jackson song. Miss Jackson, if you're.
Yeah,
in any
that was
case,
that was good. I got that.
here we go. So it's a Sun and Jin episode,
Yes,
which
it
is
is.
awesome, and
Yes.
obviously, I think the audience is always hungry for more Sun and Jin because they are the only real husband and wife on the island prior to Bernard and Rose's arrival, and
We think it's actually one of the best episodes of television you'll ever read.
yeah, exactly, because it's subtitled Wall to Wall. One of the things that we're especially proud of in this episode is that the entire teaser, the first 5 minutes of the show, are entirely in Korean.
That's how we roll.
That is how we roll. And obviously, I think it speaks to Yoonjin and Daniel's sort of acting abilities that they are so capable in portraying these sort of deep emotional lives of these characters in an entirely different language. This is the first time the phone has ever rung during a podcast. It's sort of astonishing.
Someone else is going to get that.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's and we're going to be Sun's got another secret other than the fact that she could speak English, which we revealed last year.
Yeah.
And that's going to be sort of coming out in this episode. And obviously, also, we're going to be learning a little bit more about our friend Henry Gale, who may or may not be an other.
That's right. And, it's kind of, I think, a nice emotional episode. It's a little warmer. We have been doing some art episodes that are a little darker and a little bit more minor key. And this episode is, one that we really like. I think it has a really nice, warm, emotional kind of story that it tells.
Would you say it's warmer than the throw wrapped around your legs right now, or cooler?
Slightly warmer, actually.
All right. Well, there you go.
Exactly. So, should we get to questions?
Yes, please.
Cue the theme music, Chris. Okay.
Fantastic.
Fantastic.
I love
All
that
right.
theme music. I can't
All
wait
right.
to hear it.
Okay.
Carlton, I have a question for you.
Go for it, Dan.
Subject: Tarp Harp? Question mark.
Tarp?
Exclamation
What?
point. This is posted by
Oh.
Happy Sax 126. And
Okay.
Carlton, don't get excited. That's Happy Sax
Okay.
126. SAX. Where did all the tarps come from? We saw Jack helping Ana Lucia build her tent with a tarp. Hurley helps Libby to put her tent up with a tarp, and Sawyer's is made out of a tarp. How many tarps are there on the island?
That's a very, very good question, Damon. And
It's not my question.
and
It's
Happy Tarp.
Happy Sax.
Happy Sax.
Don't confuse Happy Sax with Happy Tarp.
Happy Sax Tarp. Thank you for your question. Big planes like Oceanic 815 not only carry passengers, they carry a lot of freight. There's these big metal containers in the bottom of the plane that are transporting things from Australia to the United States, like boomerangs. And assumedly, there was a container of tarps. Australia is actually known as a country which produces tarps.
It's actually the
it's
tarp capital of the world.
It
from
is.
what I understand.
And in fact, really, if you want to buy a high quality tarp, you should buy Australian.
Hold on one moment. I actually just realized all this time sitting next to you that is in fact not a throw wrapped around your legs at all, but a tarp.
It is.
And everything comes together, folks.
This is a special Angora tarp.
I love it. It's really fantastic.
Thank you.
Probably
So-
not water resistant, but
No,
what's
it
the
is.
difference between a throw and a tarp?
Well, a tarp is water resistant. That's why you wouldn't put a throw. You wouldn't use a throw as the roof of your shack if you were a castaway.
But if it was raining, you would actually be better to wrap your legs in a tarp than a throw.
You would, exactly.
You'd know.
Okay. So,
All right, I guess that settles that question. Thank God. All right,
Okay.
do you have another question for me, Carlton?
I do, Damon. Let me ask you this question
Yeah,
here. The Cave, posted by
Oh,
I can't.
jeez.
Stutter. Iranus 123.
You know who you are.
So anyway, yes, Aranus. That's probably how you pronounce it. 123. Damon, since finding the hatch, does anyone still live in the caves, or are they all back on the beach? And if so, why?
Well, that's a good question, Aranis, if that is in fact the way your name is pronounced. Essentially, this season, our group of castaways began to sort of realize, hey, we might be here for a while, and they've actually started building more permanent shelters. As you have been watching the show, hopefully you've been realizing. on the beach, which is actually a much sort of safer and better place to live in the caves. But then also the hatch sort of offered all the, if they were in a security situation where they needed to be protected or safe, they could all sort of pile in there. So we as storytellers basically said, instead of dividing the camp up into threes, a group of people in the hatch, a group of people in the caves, and a group of people at the beach, we just felt it behooved us to nail it down to two. And the caves were kind of depressing anyway. I always got depressed whenever we were there. What are you going to do in the cave?
The caves were not good.
If you could live on that island, would you hang out in a cave?
It's like, yeah, exactly. Would you rather live beachfront, or would you rather live back in the, low-rent cave condos? I say beach.
All right. Excellent. I've got another question for you, Carlton. And as it is typed in all caps, I'm going to try to perform it in its all caps fashion.
Wait, I'm going to hold my throw up here just to kind of keep the volume down.
Yeah, don't throw up on your legs. The milk is the subject heading, and it's by Hot for Boone. One word. I was reading that in the episode where Harley has a dream, there is a milk carton with a picture of Walt on it. I guess you have had this episode there. Has he been missing before, or what's the story?
Walt is missing. There is no question about that. And thank you. That was actually very nicely done. There was a certain measure of volume and anger in your voice that
really captured Hot for Boone's.
It did. Yeah, Walt is missing, and obviously, the Walt situation is a big story point for the end of the season, and we will be returning to that storyline before the season is over. I mean, we're not going to let the whole Michael Walt situation drag on beyond the end of this season.
I also think that sort of in your reading, because you were reading that in this episode, when Harley has a dream, Hot for Boone, that what sort of failed to get mentioned is that it is in fact a dream. So it is sort of in the subconscious of the castaway. Sometimes information filters. Certainly, Hurley knows that. Hurley doesn't know that Walt has been taken yet, which is probably what prompted your question, which makes it interesting as to how in his subconscious there would be a Easter egg of Walt being gone, which is kind of cool because obviously the idea of dreams on the island is going to become a little more prevalent in episodes to come.
Yes, I think that's very well stated. All right, well, we're pretty much out of time for this podcast, but we thank you for bearing with us.
Whew.
Exactly.
This was a doozy.
It was. I enjoyed it, though, as always.
I did, too.
So, Damon, we'll see you next time. Actually, I'll see you in a story meeting in about 2 minutes after this podcast.
Yeah, we're just going to go back to Disney World. That's what we do all day. So you guys can wait around for new episodes.
I think we should do a podcast from Disney World. That would be good.
On a roller coaster.
On they should put us in a glass booth, by...
They should just put us in a glass booth, period.
By Space Mountain or something.
Exactly. All right. Well,
okay,
thanks, guys.
Thank you, guys, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
That's all the time we have for now, but be sure to join us next podcast when we present you guys with a new contest to choose a theme song for Damon and Carlton. That's right, they wanted it, and now you get to vote on it. Remember, you can also submit your own fan questions at lost.abc.com. The Whole Truth airs Wednesday, March 22nd from 9 to 10 p.m. only on ABC.